Wonderful. Welcome everyone to Horticulture Corner, Rare and Exotic Plants. My name is Denise Reagan. I'm the Executive Director of the Garden Club of Jacksonville. This is a hybrid program, so we have people here in person and all of you at home. So we're very happy to have both audiences with us here tonight. Joining me tonight is Corinne Lightfoot, our Marketing and Membership Manager, and David Hatcher, who I believe is checking some people in back there, and Jacob Senor, who's our event ambassador, who's running the bar. Yes, we have a bar here tonight, so if you're on Zoom, you don't get to do that. I'm sorry. All right. This is Horticulture Corner, and we have a great series of programs we've had all year long, thanks to our two co-chairs, Mika Hardison and Susan Painter, and I want to thank them for being here, and I think Susan's here tonight. There she is. Thank you, Susan. All right, and are there any board members here? I haven't seen anybody that snuck in. So we usually have a couple of board members here tonight, but not tonight. I know our President Tiffany is traveling around the world today. All right. I would like to thank all the Garden Club members who have joined us today. If you're a Garden Club member, raise your hand and give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for being here tonight. If you're not a member of the Garden Club, please chat with someone on our staff, one of our members, pick up a form at the check-in table, or visit GardenClubJax.org to learn more about membership. Anytime is a great time to join, and we would love to have you as one of our ranks. Okay. Oh, sorry. All right. That's membership. All right. So I'd like to tell you about a couple of upcoming programs. We have a giant plant sale. So in addition to all these great plants that are going to be for sale tonight, and you should snap all of them up because they look amazing. We have a giant plant sale that is on April 8th. That is just so cool. It is a plant sale along with an amazing day of activities throughout the Garden Club's campus. There will be a budding gardeners program there, including nature-themed crafts, lawn games, and more. And there's a preview party the night before on April 7th. So if you really, really like plants, you want to get there on the night before so you can pick out the best ones. Those of you know who you are. All right. So that is April 7th and 8th. Also, we have our Budding Gardeners program coming up this Saturday, March 11th, sorry. You can celebrate St. Patrick's Day and environmental awareness with several activities, including planting a seedling to take home and grow, and learning about ways you can practice sustainability with your family. So if you have a child in grades 1 through 6, it's a great way to spend a Saturday morning. We hope to see you there on March 11th. We also have a program called Combined Circles. The one that's coming up in March, on March 21st, is with Jeremy Marquis of Marquis, Latimer, and Hallback. That is the company that the Garden Club hired to do our landscape redesign. It's an amazing, amazing plan. It's kind of from 30,000 feet. It's a plan for the entire landscape from Riverside Avenue back to the river. So you can come see that and weigh in on what you think about our plans. It's definitely one of the many options that you're going to have to give us feedback, because as we go along, we really want to hear from all of you about this space, that we want it to make it as public and open as possible. All right, so that is March 21st. We have a Floralia program, which is a floral design program. This one is called Totally Tubular, kind of a throwback to the 80s. And you're going to learn how to design having dominant cylindrical forms throughout your program, throughout your arrangement. So that's going to be fun. That is on March 23rd. And we have a flower show coming up at the end of this month. So the Late Bloomers Garden Club, which is part of the Garden Club of Jacksonville, is having an American flower show through at the Garden Club, and it's open to the public on March 29th and 30th. And finally, we have our Fun with Flowers program on May 11th. This one is selling out. It's very close. So there's about 15 spots open. There's 2 classes. It's Lindsay Miranda, who designed several arrangements sourced from her mobile Blooms flower truck. And so it's a make and take. You design it, you get all the materials that you need, and you take it home. You can give it to your mom because Mother's Day is right around then, or you can keep it for yourself. All right, so that's all of our programs. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day. Mason McCandless is the owner and operator of Pink Prince Plants, a Black and queer-owned cottage rare plant nursery and pop-up bakery founded to create joy during the depths of 2020. He is a Houston native, recently transplanted, along with his plants, to Florida by way of Brooklyn. Mason fell in love with exotic plants at first sight. For 3 years, he has brought his curiosity, focus, and passion to building a collection of more than 200 rare specimens. Along the way, he's learned best practices by trial and error. Now he's going to share lessons with you to save you many, many headaches. He is also a baker. At the height of the pandemic, he merged his two hobbies and Pink Prince Plants was born. I love saying that name. Now he offers gorgeous plants, remarkably yummy baked goods, workshops, and good vibes to the world. If you have questions for Mason and you're on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat. And if you're here in person, a little bit later, David is going to come around with the microphone and we want to capture your question on the recording. So make sure that we get you. So raise your hand and we'll make sure the microphone comes to you. All right, without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Mason can start sharing his.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Denise.
Mhm.
Can y'all see that? Is that the screen? There we go. All right. Hello, evening, Garden Club Jacksonville. How's everyone doing? Good. Great. I'm glad to hear that. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm really excited to just go ahead and share a little bit about my journey of how I got into plants, and then to go and take you through my best practices for tips and tricks of how you can grow these beautiful plants in your own homes. I think the rare plant and exotic plant market has a stigma of being the divas and a little bit more of a finicky plant breed and specimens, but I'm here to totally destigmatize that stereotype and let you know that there's nothing to fear. And a lot of these plants, especially if you're already growing some tropical plants like philodendrons or monsteras around your own home, that you are already on the right path to growing these rare plants, and that they'll be able to find happy spaces within your home. So jump into it a little bit. And so the first slide over here is just to give y'all some background context about the rare plant market and how I got into this. So about in 2020, just before that, there was a huge surge in the plant market in general, and especially in the rare plant market, with everyone cooped up at home and looking for more exciting things to do and ways to spend their disposable income. There was a major spike in the plant market. The rare plant market totally took off, and the Wall Street Journal even actually said at one point that you should stop investing in stocks and start investing in plants because they were doing that well. I was seeing plants sell for tens of thousands of dollars online, and it just was amazing me to see that people were so excited to bring these rare, unique specimens into their home at such a hefty price tag. So now the plant market has kind of tapered off and come back to a little bit more of a normal normal market expectation, but there are still definitely some plants that are selling at heightened costs. If you can see examples from behind me, I took screenshots from within the Facebook groups that I've joined to get to acquire these plants. And there was a particular plant, the variegated red Congo, at one point was selling for $3,500 for a single leaf. So those were prices that were happening a few years ago. It's dropped since then, but the variegated Spiritus sanctii is an example that I screenshot from this last week. That plant actually sold for $5,000 this last week. So some plants are still in particular. Collectors are always looking for the newest, the hottest, the most exciting thing to get their hands on. And a lot of these marketplace transactions are happening within national Facebook groups. So a lot of these are private Facebook groups of like 30 to 40,000 members, and people are auctioning, bidding, selling, which is in the plant world called a purge. So there's a lot of plant purges because a lot of growers have excess amounts of plants and they're needing to get rid of their collection to keep funding their plant habits. So some of those are my favorite plant groups on the screen that I've joined in the past and that have been able to give me access to this market and access to all of the amazing knowledge and tips and tricks that I've learned to share with y'all today. So to share a little bit about my plant journey, it started in New York, Brooklyn. And prior to 2020 and COVID, I actually surprisingly didn't even own a single houseplant. I never was I never grew up with any kind of plants in my house. My family were not plant people. I thought that that's something that would never cross my path until I met my lovely partner who's in the audience. And he actually gifted me my first plants. It was a pothos that we grew in our Brooklyn apartment. And it was just such a lovely way for us to be able to bring in nature into our, the concrete jungle where it was really hard to be able to feel in touch and centered around nature. It was also just a beautiful way for me to be able to literally get my hands in the dirt and to see the fruits of my labor, of the hard work that I had been able to put in. So it was a beautiful relationship that I was able to kind of cultivate with these plants. And that really sparked my interest in the plant world. So through the Facebook groups and through the pandemic had catapulted us from Brooklyn, New York to Las Vegas, Nevada, which is where my family was living at the time. And we were kind of shuffling between New York and Las Vegas and deciding where we were going to live and what was going to happen. And we ended up living in Las Vegas and moving in with my family for a little bit of time. And on the process of one of our road trips, we stayed with a friend of mine, and she's an extreme gardener and a plant aficionado. And she had just discovered this world of rare plants and shared her discoveries with us on this road trip. And it was so exciting to just be able to see these amazing rare plants that I'd never heard of before. I'd never seen plants with the variegation patterns like that, or the textures of the leaf shades, and I was just totally enamored by them. So literally the very next day on our haul from Texas to Las Vegas, the last leg of our trip, I had Matt pull over in the middle of the road somewhere in the middle of Texas because I was participating in my first plant deal. So we pulled over to purchase a philodendron silver sword, which is my first rare plant. It had these beautiful silver leaves, and I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I totally caught the bug. I don't think Matt knew what he was getting me into, gifting me that first plant. From there, I decided to want to start to circumvent the plant resellers in the groups that were acquiring these plants and then propagating them and reselling them and going straight directly to the source. So I acquired my importer's license and I started purchasing these plants from the exporters directly, mainly in Indonesia and Brazil, bringing them in myself. The plants were being shipped to me in a box, sent in the mail for 10 to 14 days, going through a customs process. You'd be surprised as to how resilient these plants actually can be. No sunlight, no water, barely any medium on their roots because they can't be imported with any kind of dirt or soil or bugs. So they definitely can kind of come to you in rough shape, and you go through a rehabilitation process that takes 1 to 2 months. But once you're able to reacclimate them to their new environment, you can have thriving plants to grow and to propagate from. This is an example of the first setup of our greenhouses in the Las Vegas house. So this was in the garage in Las Vegas. I was growing these tropical rare plants that were native to the rainforest area in desert humidity. So we were combating 15 to 20% humidity levels, sometimes even less inside of the house. And so it was a lot of trial and error process of figuring out all the different requirements, the best ways to grow them, how to keep them happy, and so just learning like all about what these plants needed, and especially growing them in such a harsh environment. I'm fortunate enough that the Las Vegas plant market and the community were really willing to share all their tips and tricks of the best ways to grow in the desert. And I'm also very fortunate that I'm not having to be there anymore and that they're loving their life in Florida. So there's lots of trial and error, lots of death. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. There were lots of plants that did not make it. And I think one of the largest growing processes for me in the plant world was learning to let go. I definitely was holding on to a lot of responsibilities and a lot of guilt for not having these plants thrive under my care. But I had to acknowledge that I'm a living human being and I'm trying to do my best, and plants are also living beings and they're trying to do their best. And sometimes we're just not compatible together. So figuring that out and discovering through all the lessons of the trial and error was definitely crucial in my plant journey. And after experimenting and figuring out and establishing everything in Las Vegas, we decided to pack everything up and move back to the East Coast and come back to Florida. My partner Matt is from here, and it was the agricultural hub and the boom of the plant market. So I was really excited to come and bring my plants out here and to be able to network with all the lovely plant community out here and for them to be in a more thriving, optimal environment for them. So we packed all the plants up and we're able to move them in a van. And this is the actual photo from the first plant sale that I had here in Florida. The local Jacksonville rare plant market and community have been so welcoming to have me be hosted at some of their events. And I'm just excited to be able to take root in Jacksonville and to be able to continue to be a knowledge source and an expert and to share my love of plants and my plants with people that also love plants. So to show you an overview of what we'll kind of be covering today, I'm going to first take you by some of my favorite plants that I have really caught my eye and that I've grown to love over time, creating the right environment, all the tips and tricks that you need for watering and for fertilization, propagation, the different mediums that you need to be able to grow best in, the power of poles and why poles are so essential for the growth of a lot of these epiphytes, and pest prevention, and then finally moving a collection. These 4 plants are some of my top favorites right now and have been for the longest time. The first off is the pink princess. I was totally captured by the vibrancy of those pink leaves. I was like, couldn't believe that a plant could produce such pink hues. So it's actually what inspired the namesake of my plant company, Pink Prince Plants. Took inspiration from my favorite plant, the pink princess. And I don't think I actually even introduced myself at the beginning, so I'm Mason, by the way, just in case anyone was wondering, with pink prince plants. But the next one is going to be the Anthurium luxurians. This was a fascinating plant for me. It had that reptilian kind of textured leaf. It's called coagulation in the plant world. And I was really turned off to Anthuriums. I had heard that they were notoriously hard to grow. And this was one of the first plants that opened my eyes up to the world of Anthuriums, just to know that it was in my capacity to be able to grow these plants. What was really eye-opening for me with the Anthuriums were experimenting with them here in Florida and growing them actually in a living room environment with no additional humidifier, no additional sunlight, and just letting them do their thing. And I've had really great success here doing that. And so it's just nice to know that there is a possibility for people with Anthuriums and to not be so intimidated with them. The third plant there is a strawberry shake, named for its beautiful strawberry creamy hues that it can produce. A lot of the plants, the variegation pattern depend on the genetics of the specific plant, where the lineage had come from and what the plants prior to that had kind of looked like. But the strawberry shake is known to come out with these lime green patterns that eventually slowly fade and burn into this more pinkish, creamy hue. And it's just a really fun process to watch from the beginning of the plant leaf emerging and then letting it like harden off and seeing what it develops into. And lastly, I have my favorite Monstera, the Deliciosa aurea. It is a beautiful version of a Monstera. It has these lime green patterns that fade into a more yellow coloring. And I have an example of one here actually on stage with me. So you can kind of see the comparison to on screen where it has the lime green coloration and then how it burns into a more yellow color. So that's the namesake and the signal of the aurea is the yellow coloring that it has on there. Versus the albo, there's also a Monstera albo with the white coloring. So the aurea and the albo is the names kind of help signify what colors you're going to get with those plants. So I'll jump into creating the perfect environment. The first step into that is humidity. So this is actually a shot from the inside of one of my greenhouse setups in Las Vegas, and this is what you do not want to see when you open up your greenhouse. I had let the humidifier run too long. It wasn't on its timer. The humidifiers can be pretty difficult with setting up a timer. I actually have a system now. It's a level width humidifier, and those are great because you can set everything from your phone. There's an app, you can turn them on and off, you can regulate the humidity, and they actually have a reminder for you to clean your humidifiers frequently. So the maintenance of the humidifier is essential. If you're using them currently, you probably know that they can get quite dirty. So cleaning them with vinegar is definitely the best way to go, and just maintaining those about every 2 weeks is best. You definitely want to achieve a humidity percentage of around 60 to 80%. When you're looking for those optimal growing conditions for the plants. And you can monitor that with humidity monitors. They're pretty cheap online. And you want to avoid any kind of buildup, not only with the humidity, but any kind of water or wetness buildup on the leaves of the plant. So if you have your humidifier directly facing the leaf and stuff, you don't want water to be sitting on the leaves. That's a recipe for like a fungal or bacterial infection. So you want to have the humidifier in the pointing in the general direction of the plants, but not too close so that it's building up any kind of moisture on your plants. Using distilled water is also great to just make sure you're having clean water processed through there, because all that water is being spewed out into your air. So you want to make sure everything's clean. And also I mentioned on there to avoid ACs. If you're growing in an environment that has AC units or some kind of ducts in there, you want to make sure that the AC is not facing the plants. That'll continue to dry the leaves out and do the exact opposite of what your humidifier is trying to achieve. Air circulation is also essential for the plants. You want to make sure that they're breathing clean air, that you're breathing clean air. It helps prevent any kind of bacterial or mold infections. And you want these fans and the air circulation to not be facing directly on the plant. You want the air to be circulating in the room, but not spraying, hitting the leaves really intensely with the fan. So it's just important to make sure you have fan setups. And we use an air purifier in our space just to make sure that we're constantly circulating fresh air for the plants and for us, because our grow room is currently inside of our house. So we just want to make sure all the air is super clean for everyone. The next thing is going to be light. There is a common, saying of bright indirect light, and it's really hard to dissect what that means. So for me, typically that means that you want to have your plants placed in a bright place, somewhere near a window is usually best, but you don't want any direct sunlight coming into that window and hitting your plant leaves. That'll eventually burn the plant leaves and will be detrimental to the plant's health. So you want to make sure that the plant has ample amount of light. If that's placed on a desk or placed on a windowsill next to the plant, you just want to monitor what way the window is facing. If it's eastern facing light and more intense, if it's western facing exposure and a little bit less intense, that'll all kind of determine where your plant light factors are playing in. In addition to that, I supplement a lot of my lighting with artificial lights. The plants that I grow are from indigenous to the rainforest area. They're usually close to the equator, where the light hours and the sunlight days and the growth periods are about 12 hours a day. So here, where we have a little bit shorter of grow times and growth periods, I supplement any kind of additional light that I need from artificial lights. There are many different sources of where you can get your artificial lights from. You don't necessarily need the purple UV ray ones. I actually recommend that you kind of go for a more balanced white light. So I like to prefer the white lights, and you can get them from, Amazon has grow lights that are grow specific, but a lot of growers even just go to like Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, and you can get like a regular shop light that's some kind of fluorescent lighting, and just hang that above your plants to supplement. Also, I put them on timers so that you're not having to go in, turn them on, turn them off, worry about what times they're going off and on each day. So putting a light on the timer is just really helpful for the plants to grow. And I usually place them about 10 to 12 inches above the top of the plant. This is a little bit higher because it's in our home, but there's a really powerful light within that lampshade there. It's facing down the plant, and it's loving it right now. And the last thing that I'd love to mention is love. I think it's the most important factor in your plant growing experience. Your plants need the time, they need the attention, they need you to be consistent in your routine. So they definitely like having you around. They want to be treated like they're needed and wanted, and family members around the house. So just being around them, sending them your good energy, singing to them, dancing with them, and just like putting that out there so that they can receive it and that you can receive their benefits back. Routine is really important. Once you establish a care regimen for your plants, you definitely want to maintain that. So you have, once you get your plants into an optimal condition where they're happy with the humidity, they're happy with the lighting, they're happy with your watering schedule. Just maintaining that and keeping that going is essential to maintain the health of the plant. And a fun fact about the singing is that while you're singing and expelling your carbon dioxide into the air, your plants are absorbing that, they're using that for their photosynthesis, and then they're producing oxygen for you to breathe in. So it's just a mutually beneficial relationship. All right, so here are the watering tips and soil mixes. Watering tips are very hard to give like general watering advice for every plant because all plants are different, all environments are different, all growers' habits and time schedules are different. So it's definitely not a one size fits all solution. But it's important to be aware of the species that you're growing. So if you have a succulent versus a tropical plant, they're going to need different watering amounts. I think for most of my tropical aeroids that I grow, they take water about 7 to 10 days, and I have them on that kind of schedule, and they're really happy with that. You want to allow their medium that they're in to kind of dry out in between waterings. You don't want it to get too bone dry, but you want it to make sure that there's a break period between when you're giving it a really nice watering and then before the next time you water it again. So I've found for me in my growing environment, that happens about 7 to 10 days. Sometimes they go longer and that's okay, but just making sure that you're trying to keep up with that schedule as much as you can. The environment that you're growing in, like I mentioned, if you're supplementing the humidity and you have a humidifier growing, those plants might not dry out as quickly as something that's in your living room and that's in ambient humidity. So just being aware of where you're growing these plants is really important. So being cognizant of that environment. And next is the medium that they're in. There are lots of different types of mediums and mixes that you can grow your plants in, and they all require different watering needs. If you have something like that's really aerated, like a perlite, and you're growing straight in perlite, you're going to have to water that really frequently, especially if it has a lot of drainage holes at the bottom, versus something that's like a sphagnum or a hydroponic or a semi-hydroponic setup that are going to need a little bit less watering. So we can talk about those mixes here. A lot of these aeroids appreciate a soil mix. They like a nice mixture and combination of different kinds of amendments that you put in there. So a typical soil mixture that people enjoy and that the aeroid plants enjoy is about like 30% soil. When you're making your mix, is about 30% soil, 20% cocoa coir. I do about 30% of orchid bark, and then the other 10% are either 10% of perlite or a pumice or some kind of like aeration, and a 10% of horticultural charcoal. That's really great for maintaining the health and detoxifying the soil that they're growing in, and it also maintains a good pH balance for the plants. Next is sphagnum moss. Sphagnum is pretty popular in the aeroid community. It's what a lot of plants are growing in nature, and it retains moisture really well. So it's just an easy go-to method. I really prefer getting a large bucket of water, putting a few drops of your favorite like plant fertilizer or food in there, soaking the sphagnum moss in the fertilized water, and then draining it out. You want to squeeze out as much moisture as you can. You want to make sure that the moss is damp and not soaking wet when you pot them, and then potting it from there. And then lastly is semi-hydroponic. This is something that I've been experimenting more with more recently myself, and I've been really enjoying it. And I think my plants have been enjoying it too. A hydroponic setup would mean that they're all completely grown in water, which requires a lot of different fertilization and watering fertilization requirements to make sure that they're getting ample nutrients. Semi-hydroponic means that it has a water reservoir, but it also has medium that it's growing in. So whether that medium is a perlite medium or it's a stratum, stratum is what's displayed on the screen right there. It's compressed soil pellets. They're weighted really nicely so they keep your plant like lodged in place while it's in the water. And it's also soil, so it has a nice amount of nutrients already included in the mixture. So that offers you a more passive way to kind of grow your plants, not as active, meaning you're not having to water them as frequently because it does have that water that it's already sitting in. So that's really nice if you have a little bit less time to care for your plants, or if you travel frequently or something. Semi-hydroponic is definitely a great option to go for because you're having to not water them as frequently as you would as something that's in soil or that's something that drains really well. Next is fertilization. If you are a plant grower already, you're probably pretty familiar with fertilizing your plants, but it's really great to be able to supplement those additional nutrients that your plants aren't getting naturally from the mediums that they're in. So you have to pay attention to the NPK values, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium values, and how much you're giving your plant at a given time. For aeroids and for these kinds of plants, what's recommended is a 3-1-2 value. And so just making sure that you're looking at the labels of the fertilizer that you're purchasing and reading the application instructions and making sure that you're getting those values correct when you're fertilizing them. I also supplement with calcium and magnesium. It's not included in a lot of the fertilizers that you purchase, but it is essential for the plant growth. So making sure that you're incorporating calcium and magnesium into your fertilization schedule is essential. I do a small diluted amount with every watering, but you can also do a higher concentration once a month. It just depends on what your schedule is like, and you just make sure you read the back of the bottle that you purchase to make sure you're giving it the right amount. For me, the small amount that I use is about a teaspoon of water per gallon that I include in there. And then lastly, I also like to include root stimulator in my watering schedule. The root stimulator just allows the roots to develop a more robust root system, which is really important for the nutrient uptake of your plants. So allowing them to expand how many roots they have and growing a more robust root system will give you a more robust and a healthier plant to grow from. Next, for a lot of these plants, there is a lot of power in the usage of poles. Many of my plants that I have with me on stage and for sale today are epiphytes, meaning that an epiphyte is a plant that grows on another plant and is not parasitic. Usually they're actually mutually beneficial. So both of the plants, the one growing up the supporting plant and the supporting plant, are able to grab benefits from their relationship. The plants that I'm growing that are growing up the supporting plants, usually a tree is what they're hoisted onto. Those grow up the plants and are able to develop into a fuller maturity. So it really helps them develop into their full size, and also the support of the supporting plant allows the plant's aerial roots of the epiphytic plant to grow down the supporting plant and back into the soil to absorb more nutrients. So all of these are really important factors when you're considering growing kinds of plants that are epiphytic. Those poles are used and supplemented at your house plants with moss poles, with bamboo, and with other regular stakes. I have a few examples of the regular stakes and the bamboo on stage with me here. And a lot of growers really enjoy the usage of moss poles, but those can be time and labor and cost intensive, just making moss poles, especially depending on how big your collection is. The reason why they like them is because it kind of simulates a tree in nature and something that would be moist for the aerial roots to kind of grow into the moss and then back down into the soil, but it's not essential for them to have moss poles. I've achieved similar and really great results with just bamboo and sticks. As long as they have that support to attach onto, they'll be happy. So it's really important that you're giving them that support in that prop. Next, I'm going to cover propagation. And we're going to do this pretty quickly. There's a lot to learn. And if you have any questions or need to run through anything again from any of these points of the slides, you're able to refer back onto the Garden Club's website. All of this will be recorded and uploaded there. And I also have my contact information at the bottom of each screen and on the last slide. So if you have any other questions, by the way, feel free to message me. I'm here to help you. So propagation is really important to identify what you're propagating, where you're propagating, all the parts that you're propagating in. If you can see here on the left of your screen, in pink is the node. So that's the segment in between the two plants. It's usually found around the aerial roots, where the aerial roots are growing, and you want to be able to identify where the different sections of the plant is. So the node is a really essential part to list, to identify. The picture is a little difficult to see. It looks like it's kind of pointing towards that bump on the plant, but it's actually that line right below the bump on there. So that's the node that you're kind of looking out for. If you see on the plant, on the picture in the middle in orange, that's actually identifying the auxiliary bud. So the auxiliary bud is the area of the plant in which after you propagate, the new plant will grow from. So while you're propagating, it's imperative to make sure that you are not cutting the auxiliary bud. If you cut the auxiliary bud, no new plants will grow. And what we call this in the plant world is a spent node. No one wants a spent node. You can have this beautiful plant, it'll have amazing leaf, you can have a robust root system, but nothing new will grow. So you'll be staring at your beautiful plant for a year and nothing will come from it. So it's definitely important to identify where the auxiliary bud is to make sure you're missing that when you're making your cuts, when you're propagating. And the last part I'm going to identify is the aerial roots. Those are the roots that are used for the epiphytic plants to go back into the soil and to absorb more nutrients. But when you propagate from there, those aerial roots will eventually develop after you let them sit in their medium, and those aerial roots will develop into the new root system for your plant. So it's really important that you're not slicing any aerial roots and that you're giving it a good amount of aerial roots for them to continue to establish a new root system once they're on their own. You can actually see in that example on the right-hand side of your screen, the green arrow is pointing to the aerial root. And then if you look up and to the left, you can see the new growth kind of popping out from that pink princess node right there. So that new growth is coming from the auxiliary bud. So that's why it's really essential to make sure you're missing that auxiliary bud so the new growth can continue to form. So on this next slide, I'm going to show y'all an actual side-by-side example of all of the parts and components of the plants listed on one plant example, and then where I would actually make that cut to propagate. So here in the pink, you have the node segments. Those are really close to the aerial roots. So look out for the aerial roots. Will help you identify the different segments, which are the nodes. In orange right there, it's pretty faint, but there is a little bump there, I promise you. So that orange circle right there is identifying the auxiliary bud. Again, that's where the new plant will grow from. And then in red, it's showing the aerial roots. You want to make sure you're missing all of these parts when you're cutting. So the ideal place to cut is between the two nodes, and the space in between the two nodes is called the internodal spacing. So you want to make a cut in the internodal spacing, missing the auxiliary bud and the aerial roots. So I mean, the main thing that you want to miss there is the auxiliary bud. The petiole is also being shown there. That's where the leaf is attached to the stem of the plant through the petiole. So if you were to cut that on accident, it happens, and that won't affect the health or the vigor of your plant after your propagation. You'll just be missing that leaf. And sometimes, in fact, when you're propagating and you're looking for the auxiliary bud of your plant, it's hidden inside of the petiole. So you have to kind of pull back at the leaf itself to identify where the auxiliary bud is inside of the petiole, so that when you make the cut, you make sure you're not slicing that. So on the photo to the right, you can actually see where I decided to make the cut, missing all of the important parts. And lastly, with propagation, there's a good before and after protocols that you want to make sure that you're covering. You want to make sure you're sterilizing your tools. It's really important that no contaminations being introduced into the cut of the plant when you make your cut. Just like operation is with humans, you want to make sure you sterilize. You don't want to contaminate any new parts of the plant. So that could lead to some kind of infection, or it could also lead to rot. So it's just really important to make sure you're sterilizing your tools when you use them, before you use them. And after you make your cuts, it's important to kind of let your plant callus and essentially scab over. When you make the cut, the plant typically will release some kind of liquid or like a sap, and it can be a little bit wet. So I typically make my cuts, I set them out on the table, and I let them, I expose them to air, and I let them dry out just a little bit. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes for them to callus. You don't want them to sit there too long, but just enough for it to kind of stop the bleeding, if you will. And lastly, you want to make sure you have whatever medium or what pot or whatever mixture you want to propagate into already set up, so that you can keep the ball rolling as you're propagating. I typically prefer to propagate directly into water. I find that the aerial roots grow really well in water, and I just stick them in there. It's really passive, really easy. You don't risk any kind of dehydration. And that's a lot of what you're trying to combat when you propagate, especially when you propagate a plant and it doesn't have an established root system already. It has no way to get water and to stay hydrated. So putting it into water immediately just allows it to have an easy access to water and to form roots. So I let them sit in water typically for about a month or so until I can see secondary roots. So the first root that comes out is the primary, and then you'll see a feeder root kind of come from the primary root, and that's called a secondary root. When you start identifying and seeing additional roots growing, that's a good indication that you can kind of move that into a different medium where you're growing your preferred medium. Now, the main attraction I think is really helpful is pest treatment and prevention. Does anyone here have some experience with pests or some horror stories? Or yes, I think we've all kind of been there. So I'm here to try and help you with everything that I've learned along the way. Some of these pests I've faced myself, some I have not fully faced, and I hope never to. So there are two main options that growers typically look at when you're dealing with pests. You have chemicals and you also have organic controls. I'll start with the chemicals first. These are synthetic chemicals that are produced in labs. They are typically very toxic to everything. They're toxic to the pest that you're trying to eradicate. They're toxic to people. They're toxic to pets, children, pollinators, the environment. So you have to be really aware and really cautious when you're using these. It's really important to read the full label. You want to make sure you're reading the front, the back, any pamphlets that are included, just so that you can get a full scope of what you're dealing with when you're using these chemicals. Also, additionally, online, you can look up the SDS or the safety data sheet, and that will give you additional information and safety procedures that you should be taking when using these kinds of chemicals. Whether you're using synthetic chemicals or organic chemicals or not, it's important to be reading the label completely. Some synthetic chemicals that are really popular and that are really great for pest treatment and prevention is BioAdvance. It's a 3-in-1, it's systemic, it stays in the plant system, and it also takes care of a lot of fungal, bacterial infections, and in addition to the pests. Fluoromite is a really popular one for mite. It treats mites, spider mites specifically, and minks 2 and avid are pretty similar in their treatment modalities, the chemicals that are in them, and what pests they treat. So those are pretty similar chemicals, but either one of those options are really good options when you're looking at facing some pests. And then BotaniGuard is a popular one. It's listed under synthetic, but it's actually derived from a bacteria. So it is technically a natural source, but the concentrations at which the bacteria are inside of there are pretty high. So it's still a pretty toxic chemical. It's not OMRI or organically listed, but it is coming from organic material. And then next, I'll also include some organic control methods. These are derived from nature. A lot of the ingredients in there are from nature, but they're found in the control and in the sprays. They're found in much higher concentrations that they will ever actually be found in nature. So meaning they are still quite toxic. They're much less toxic than any kind of synthetic or chemical control, but they can still be toxic to pets, people, your plants, the pests, pollinators. So it's really important to make sure you're still reading those labels, you're making sure that they are still just you're aware of all risks and protocols and warnings that go along with any of those. Just because you're mixing them in your house and making Dawn dish solutions or alcohol solutions doesn't mean it's necessarily safer to just be spraying around and breathing in. So it's really good to just be aware of what you're spraying and what best protocols you can take to protect yourself, to protect the environment, and to protect the people around you. Some of the more popular options organically would include insecticidal soap or a dish soap method, spinosade, neem oil or Azamax, Corinthians, and also rubbing alcohol is a really popular one that a lot of growers use. So just some quick do's and don'ts for pest control and for these chemicals that you're using. I think the most imperative thing is for you to identify properly what pests you're dealing with. this can be really difficult to do sometimes because they are microscopic. So making sure that you're looking for all the signs of damage, if they leave any signs of kind of like honeydew or sap or webbing or feeding marks, those can all be signals and signs of what kind of pest you're dealing with. I think the best way that I was able to identify when I was first starting was just getting a jeweler's loupe or a magnifying glass and going around my plant leaves and looking at them. I've now upgraded to a digital microscope. So if you come with me into my plant room, you will frequently see me looking at my plant leaves under a little microscope. I just like to look at them because they're pretty. And I like to also just see what's happening there on the plants. So I definitely identifying the pests that you are facing is imperative to making sure which mode of treatment you want to take. Next is isolating. The best way to prevent pests is to not introduce them to your collection and to isolate. So when you're making new plant purchases, when you're bringing them home and you're really excited, instead of just throwing them in your cabinet or your growing space or near your other plants, maybe consider putting them in a separate room or just letting them have like a 7 to 10 day isolation period so that you can watch them, make sure no eggs were laid in there, nothing's hatching in the meantime, because there's nothing more devastating than introducing your new plant and then that introducing all of your plant collection to a new pest. So it's definitely imperative to identify the pests that you're dealing with and then to go ahead and isolate your plants when you purchase them. Again, just reading the full labels is really important. With especially any of the chemical controls that are using anything synthetic, you want to make sure you're wearing full protective gear for yourself. That means long sleeve shirts, long pants, sock shoes, goggles, respirator if necessary, any eye covering. You want to make sure you're stripping your clothes, washing them separately after you spray. There are a lot of protocols that you need to follow when you're using these things, these chemicals, and all of them are listed on the safety data sheets, on the labels, which is why it's so imperative to make sure you're reading them completely. It's also really imperative to make sure you're spraying both organic and synthetic chemicals early mornings before the sun is out and late at night, kind of after the sun is setting. That's really important for two reasons. You have pollinators flying around and you want to make sure you don't hit any pollinators while you're spraying your chemicals. You want to risk affecting any of the local populations of pollinators. And additionally, you don't want your plant leaves to burn. When you're putting these chemicals on your plant leaves, they're particularly sensitive to the sunlight. So you want to make sure that they're not getting exposed to sunlight while you're spraying them. Afterwards, after you spray them as well, you want to make sure that you can kind of shade them for 12 hours or so, just so that their light, so the sun doesn't risk burning the leaves afterwards, because they can still stay sensitive even while the leaves are not wet. You want to make sure when you're spraying them that the leaves dry completely before you take them back inside. You want to make sure you're not bringing any of that wet chemical back into your home. And you want to also make sure that you're not spraying anything during like high rains, that would wash off any of those chemicals into the sewage or into the ground or into your local grass or populate. And also during high winds, you don't want any of those chemicals flying around and coming back into your face while you're spraying them. So it's making sure that you're really just being cognizant of that and allowing them to follow best practices. I think the top thing that I listed there that I skipped is you don't want to panic. I think a lot of growers, and myself in particular, when I was first facing some kind of pest or any kind of problem, and a lot of the time I was identifying some kind of damage, and it wasn't even pest related. It was just nutrient deficiency, or it was, in the wrong environment. So it's really important to not panic. If you do see a pest, just know and find comfort in the sense that most of the time you'll be able to deal with it and your plant will be back to great health in no time. If you ever feel panicky or you need a friend or a shoulder to cry on, reach out to me. I've been there. I won't judge you. So yes, the last thing I also wanted to mention too is that you don't want to overuse any of these sprays. So rotation is really important when you're trying to have an integrated pest management protocol. You don't want to continue to use the same spray over and over and over again. The pests that we're dealing with have had exposure to a lot of these chemicals, a lot of these sprays, a lot of these insecticides that we use currently have been around for a long time. So it's really important that you don't want to continue to use the same spray because they will become to develop a resistance to those sprays. So you want to make sure you're rotating the different modes of action for your plants, and you want to rotate the different sprays that you're using just so that they're not building up resistance and you all of a sudden have a super pest on your hands, which is a nightmare. All right, so we'll go through some pests. First and foremost, the most annoying, the most bothersome, I think, is fungus gnats. Anyone dealing with those currently? No? That's great. Let's keep it that way. So the best way to monitor and to check out your fungus gnat problem, a lot of like the go-to growers will kind of just go ahead and like install these yellow sticky traps. The yellow sticky traps are really great to identify if you have an issue. The fungus gnats are attracted to the yellow color and they'll fly into there and get stuck. It won't kill a lot of them, and the fungus gnats actually lay hundreds of eggs per day, possibly. So what you're mainly trying to combat there are all of the new eggs that will hatch. The adult fungus gnat that are laying those eggs and flying around only actually survive for a few days. So it's mainly about staying on top of the eggs to making sure that you're dealing with that issue. So the sticky trap is pretty effective, mainly for monitoring, not for actually dealing with the problem. This one, I actually recommend you use this product that I love. It's called Microbe Lift. The BMC version, I use 1 drop per gallon of water. It's a bacteria, it's a naturally derived ingredient, non-chemical, and it's super effective. Totally will take care of your fungus gnat problem in like 10 to 14 days. And that is a lifesaver. When the fungus gnats get bad, they can be pretty relentless. And they're also attracted to carbon dioxide. So they're like constantly flying in your face. It's not a fun time. Next is spider mites. People see these pretty frequently, especially inside of their homes. They prefer drier climates. So my biggest tip with the spider mites is that when you're seeing them and you want to deal with them just like immediately, increasing your humidity is going to be one of the best, quickest ways that you can deal with a spider mite. Just putting a humidifier next to your plant will usually deter the spider mites from being there. Next, you want to take care of all of the webbing there, either if that's through washing them off with a high pressure sprayer, or if you want to manually kind of remove the webbing acts as a medium for, or a mode for them to transport, both between plants and in the air. The spider mites actually literally fly in the air on their webs, on the air currents. So they can kind of spread throughout your home. But taking care of this webbing knocks down their first line of defense. When you're spraying, it can be kind of hard to saturate the entire plant because of this webbing. So you want to make sure you're removing the webbing and then fully saturating your plant with your choice of spray. So if you want to go to the chemical route, the first step for a lot of pests is just insecticidal soap. You want to knock down those populations as quickly as possible. It's a really effective, fast way to knock down what's currently crawling all around your plants. And from there, a chemical route is you want to do like a fluoromite, which is a miticide. It treats mites specifically. It's really effective. It's a really strong chemical. Make sure you're using all of your protective gear when using this. And Azamax. Azamax is actually really concentrated neem oil. It is organically listed, but because of the concentrations, it is still a pretty heavy chemical. Make sure you're in a really well ventilated area if you're using that. And it's an anti-feed-in and growth inhibitor. So it actually stops the pest from being able to feed and grow, which will eventually take care of the problem. And it has residual effects and lasting effects so that the pests aren't able to repopulate afterwards. If you want to go more organic route, the humidity, like I mentioned, is really important. The insecticidal soap to knock them down quickly. And then you can kind of follow that with an alcohol dilution. About a 20-to-1 dilution is the typical ratio that you want to look for your alcohol when you're spraying that on your plants. You don't want to dry your plants out too much. And then following that up with a neem oil or an Azamax. And a lot of these chemicals that I'm listing here are pretty actually expensive. They treat the problems really well, but they can be a little pricey to get your hands on. A lot of them are sold in smaller quantities on eBay. Is a really good source to be able to source some of these chemical products that you're looking for. And I also have a good amount of them in my own stock. So if you need help, you're welcome to reach out to me. Thrips are another really difficult one. These are notoriously devastating for a lot of plant growers. They have a really long life cycle, meaning that you're facing and combating multiple different generations at different stages in their lives all the time. So when you take care of the adults, the eggs are hatching, the juveniles are forming into adults, and you're just trying to constantly keep up with this life cycle. It can be really exhausting. Fun fact about thrips is that the singular word for thrips is also thrips. So they're always thrips. They can pose a severe damage to your plants. They can be pretty detrimental to your mental health. And so it's really important to try to keep on them as quickly as possible. When you start noticing signs of damage, when you see the actual thrips themselves on your plants, they're really microscopic. So just identifying them again, and then knowing the courses of action to take. For chemical treatment, BioAdvance is a lifesaver. You want to make sure it has the imidacloprid in there as an ingredient that takes care of the thrips specifically. A lot of the BioAdvance that you see in the stores here don't include that ingredient, so they won't actually treat the thrips. So it's really important that it has imidacloprid in there. And then you want to follow that with Minx, Azamax, and the Botaniguard. Those are all really great solutions, and thrips are especially chemical resistant, and they build and form those resistances really quickly. So rotation is highly important when facing thrips. The organic route, again, you want to kind of do an insecticidal spray and knockdown of the population as quickly as possible. And then you want to follow that with a neem oil. The Azamax is really effective on thrips. And then you can follow that with the spinosade, or Captain Jax is a really popular brand of spinosade. It's a naturally derived bacteria that takes care of thrips. And then pyrethrins, those are formed from chrysanthemum, and they have an immediate knockdown reaction. None of those in the organic route, except the Azamax, have a residual effect and will continue to treat even after you've sprayed. So it's really important that you're keeping up on your schedules of spraying, that you're rotating frequently. The typical schedule is about 5 to 7 days. You want to make sure you're spraying again and reapplying every 5 to 7 days. So it's really imperative that you're doing that when treating thrips. Mealybugs are another really horrible plant pest. They can kind of look interesting and fun and fuzzy, and you don't really know what's happening on your plant until it's too late. So I have them listed here as a medium risk, because at lower levels, the mealybugs actually don't pose much of a threat. But once they start to colonize and form larger populations on your plant, they can be really detrimental to your plant's health. So it's imperative that when you start to see them immediately, that you're taking care of them. They actually are a part of the scale family. So they have a protective barrier and surface. They're actually more related to soft scale versus hard scale. And so they have this mealy, waxy surface that forms on their backs, which is where they get their name mealybug from. That surface protects them from sprays. So it can be really difficult to treat them because they have this outer coating that protects them. In terms of chemicals, you want to hit them with BioAdvance, Azamax, Botaniguard, and the most effective thing that you can do is probably spot treat them. You want to go ahead and just dab them with alcohol, not diluted, directly on the mealybug, and take care of them manually. If your population gets too high or they're taking too much damage on your plant, it's best to just kind of snip that leaf and like move on with that, or move that plant away or discard of that plant, because they can be really difficult to actually get them under control. So sometimes it's better to save all of your plant collection and get rid of that one plant if necessary, but spot treatment is definitely the most effective route that you want to take for those. So those are mealybugs, and then related to them are the scale. The scale are, they come in two different versions. You have hard scale and soft scale. Hard scale is typically found outside on your trees, shrubs, things like that. Soft scale is what you usually see inside. Both mealybugs and scale also typically are never going to come into your house by nature, like flying on their webs or flying or through the air current or anything like that. Those are usually manually brought in, either on your clothing or via another plant. So, which is why it's so imperative that you're isolating your plants when you purchase them. And even if you're around plants at local plant stores or whatnot, and you see some kind of plant bug that is on a plant and you touch it, it's best to just change and wash your clothes and make sure that you're not introducing any of those plants to your the pests to your plant collection. So scale is also a pretty similar treatment. Those the hard scale you can kind of scrape off manually with your finger or something like that. But it's hard to get through that armor barrier of the scale. So the chemicals are most effective when treating scale. The BioAdvance is really great. The Azamax, Botanigard, those are all really effective at treating the scale. And then next you can do alcohol spot treatments, the insecticidal soap, and the neem. So you just want to keep following those those routines, and then making sure that you're staying up on your schedule for treatment. This is my biggest tip for pest prevention. I have now kind of myself moved on from both chemical and organic routes of control, and I've moved into biological routes of control, meaning beneficial bugs. I am literally releasing bugs into my plants and in our house. They're microscopic. They don't crawl around. You don't see them. I swear. And I release these bugs to take care of the bad bugs. So this has been a lifesaver for me in terms of costs. The chemicals and the sprays can be cost prohibitive. They can be pretty expensive to keep up with, and you can go through them a lot. And in terms of time, having to rotate through the sprays, keeping on the schedule, it can be really exhausting. So this is a really passive way to be able to take care of any kind of bug problem. Mainly the ones that I use take care of thrips and spider mites. The mites are really, the beneficial mites are really great at taking care of both thrips and spider mites. If you're dealing with something like scale, aphids, mealybugs, those have other specific bugs that are effective at treating them, but not necessarily great for growing indoors, because a lot of those treatments include beetles, ladybugs, like you see commonly, the lacewings, and those fly towards light surfaces, so they aren't actually effective at staying and feeding on the pest that you're dealing with. So it's really important when you're learning about the beneficial bugs to identify what your pest is that you're dealing with, which beneficial bugs are going to help with those problems, and then what kind of solutions you need. They offer typically in sachets or adult forms of the beneficial bugs. The adults are to deal with an immediate problem that needs the adults to go and feed and clean up those issues really quickly. And then the sachets are more slow release. They contain mites of eggs, juveniles, and adults that come out slowly, and they treat for a longer period. So that's a more preventative kind of approach. And then the adult beneficial bugs are a more immediate reactive approach. With bugs, prevention is the best form of treatment that you can use. Just making sure that you're regularly releasing your beneficial bugs and making sure that your plants are happy and that you're not noticing any other kind of like uptick in pests. You also want to make sure that you're getting them from reliable sources. My go-to source is Evergreen Growers. They're amazing. If you get bugs sent to you and they don't arrive alive, which I've never had that happen with them, they will replace them immediately, no questions asked. And they've always just sent me really robust, viable sources of these beneficial bugs. I've never had a problem with them. There are a few other bug sources that you can get them from that are a little bit cheaper, but you get what you pay for sometimes, and the bugs will arrive dead, or they won't have the right kind of bugs in them. So it's really important that you're getting them from a reliable source. A lot of places sell mite mixes, by the way, and it says that it's a great like triple threat where it can take care of a lot of different pests, but the mite mixes are usually really ineffective because some of those mites in the mite mix will actually in transit feed on the other mites. So you'll actually only end up with one kind of mite when you receive them. So I never go for the mite mixes. It's really important to get the mites individually. And that's also a video of me placing the sachets on my plants. That's how easy the pest treatment is. I just set it and forget it, and it's been a huge lifesaver. So those are just the pros and cons real quick. They're non-toxic. You're not spraying chemicals in your house. You're not spraying chemicals around your pets, children, family. You're not spraying chemicals in the environment. They're time-saving. They're very passive. Some of the cons is it can be a little cost prohibitive to get these bugs sent to you. They can be expensive for shipping fees. You need to make sure that they're next date error. So it can be a little bit expensive, but in the long run, you end up definitely saving time and money with the beneficial bugs. And also you get to stop spraying. So it's a good and a bad thing. You get to stop spraying so your plants are healthier. They're not getting doused in chemicals all the time. But also if you have an immediate pest problem that you're trying to deal with and you need to spray them, the bugs are not sometimes the route to go. And you have to be cognizant of when you last sprayed, because some of the chemicals have residual effects. So you'll release the beneficial bugs and the spray that you last sprayed on your plants will kill the beneficial bugs. So it's really important to make sure that there's a good time period between your last spray and then the release of the beneficial bugs. And then lastly, I want to just cover moving your collection. It can be really scary, spooky, stressful, time consuming, but never fear, it is possible. I have lots of tips and tricks to try to help make that process easier. I've done it a few times now, and it's definitely possible to keep your plants happy while driving them across the states. You know, time is your best or your best and your worst asset. You want to make sure you're kind of moving them in a fast and efficient way. When you're doing so, you want to make sure you're kind of taking stock of your collection. You want to see which plants are going to come, which plants are going to go, who you can maybe gift plants off to, which plants aren't going to survive the trip or, you know, aren't going to survive their new growing conditions. So it's definitely imperative that you're just like taking stock of the plants that you're going to take with you. You can kind of tape off the tops of the pots with a masking tape to keep the soil inside of them while you're moving them, so you're not having medium and soil move around in the plants while they're shuffling in transit. And next is you want to acquire your packing materials, your tubs, your polyfill. So as you can see there, I've just placed my plants in these tubs that I purchased from Target or Walmart, and you want to pack them in with this polyfill mixture. It's just a cushioning agent so that it can prevent any of your leaves or from getting damaged while they're being transported. If you set the container, the lid on top of the tub, you've created a microclimate inside of there, and that will trap the warmth and the humidity inside of there, so your plants should be good to go for their trip. You want to make sure that they're placed in a shaded area in the vehicle. You don't want the sun beaming on them during the whole trip. You want to make sure that it's climate controlled. You don't want to put it in the back of a truck where it's 100 degrees. That will fire your plants. So you just want to make sure you're being aware of where you're placing those plants, how they're being transported, securing them. And a little fun tip is that once you place them in the tub, we discovered while we were moving the plants, instead of putting your regular tub container lid on top of the container, if you take a second tub and place that on top, it extends the amount of container room that you have. So you can have a double stacked tub essentially for your taller, larger plants. So that's another fun thing. If you stop and you're taking a break in between your road trip, you want to make sure you're taking the plants out with you. You don't want to leave them in the car. And you want to make sure that when you take them out with you, that you open them up, give them the fresh air. You don't want them trapped with the humidity overnight. I think that concludes my presentation, y'all. Woo! Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I will now open up the floor to questions. If you have questions, we're going to pass the microphone around. David's going to come around and pass you the mic so we can have everything recorded. And if you have questions on Zoom, feel free to type them into the chat box, and then we'll also get to those as well.
Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind, if you could go ahead and stop your screen share so we can see you full on the recording. There we go.
Hello.
And I have a couple already in the chat, so I'm going to start with one or two from Zoom while David finds his first victim. I mean, person. So question, any way to make, I think these are the pink princess plants, put out more pink leaves?
So there is a common myth that you can, I think it's a myth, some growers swear by it, but that you can induce variegation by blasting your plants with light. I don't know the reasoning behind that quite so, but I think there is a correlation that people might have blasted their plants with a really high intense light, and it stressed their plants out and they produced more color. But basically, no, there's no way to induce the pinkness. Basically, where your leaf is growing from that auxiliary bud, where that leaf grows from, and where the striation and the stripes and the colors in the stem are, determines what colors that leaf is going to pick up when it comes out. So there's no way to actually force coloration in your variegated plants.
Wonderful. And then I've got, let's see, if you have variegated plant that has solid green, solid white, and variegated leaves, can you pick one or the other depending on which leaf you pick? So if you pick a leaf that's more variegated or one that's more green, that's somehow
determined.
Yeah.
Still no. Unfortunately, it just depends on the genetics and where the next growth comes from will determine what's going to pick up the color that it's going to pick up when it pops out. So especially when you're dealing with fully variegated plants and they're completely white, those lack chlorophyll, so those will eventually die off. I definitely tend to stay away from a totally white or a totally green leaf. I like to go for something that's a little bit more balanced, so it has the chlorophyll and the coloring, so that I can like continue to be happy and that those leaves will stay stable and sustained.
Okay, have you picked your first?
In the jungle, the plants seem to survive quite nicely without being fertilized.
Totally.
And so why do we have to fertilize so much when in the wild for thousands of years, the soil is what it is and the rain isn't providing more nutrients? Talk about why we have to fertilize when nature says you don't need it.
Well, rainwater is definitely the best fertilizer. So you have a lot of growers that will actually go and collect rainwater and use that on their plants. The reason being is because that rain is being concentrated from lakes, streams, and different sources that are already actually kind of fertilized with some of the fish nutrients that are in there. So the rain produces fertilization naturally, and then in addition, the soil is actually being fertilized by animals that have animal droppings in the soil and other forms of natural fertilization. So even though you might not see it, there's lots of fertilization happening in nature naturally.
Great.
Thank you for asking.
All right, I'm going to ask another one while you find your next person. Is it best to spray alcohol on the affected mealybug leaf and leave it, or spray and rinse, or is it a wiping thing?
So the most effective method is to do a non-diluted amount of alcohol. You want to do just straight alcohol, dip it in a Q-tip and dip that on the mealybug. That's going to be your first course of action. And then you can follow that up with a diluted 20-to-1 mix of alcohol to water, or I said that in reverse, but it's 20 parts water, 1 part alcohol. And so you can spray that on your plants and you want to let that dry. You don't want to wipe that off or shower them off either, because that will be an antithesis of treating them.
Great. We have another question. Okay, and while he gets to you, I will ask this one. This is a funny thing. I think plants on the table will be stressed from traveling, so I volunteer to permanently keep them.
That is so kind.
Thank you, Tracy. That's a very generous offer.
I
All
will have
right.
to consider that.
Here we go.
I want to thank you because I'm growing microgreens, and because most of my stuff is edible. I like food. What can I say? So so I'm interested in the pesticide stuff that's not going to be harmful. Do you have anything else as far as like for edible plants, or is it just pretty much just use the same? Because I was interested in the one thing you talked about with the bugs.
The bugs are the least toxic, less
Okay.
harmful, best way to go. I think the only consideration if you're eating them, just making sure that you're washing them thoroughly.
Right.
But I think that you have to do that if you're spraying them with chemicals or not. I would definitely recommend going some kind of beneficial bug route for edibles. It's the most organic way possible.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Here we go.
My question is, are you toxic to cats? Because I have cats.
I cannot tell you specifically exactly which ones and which ones aren't, but I'm happy to help kind of research that with you a little bit. I think some may be, but I definitely know that not all of mine are.
Okay. Also, do I use tap water or bottled water?
Great question. Tap water is totally fine. A lot of growers like to kind of use fancier water. I personally like to filter our water. We have a reverse osmosis system that I use to filter the water, just to filter out any of the fluoride or any kind of like hard chemicals that are naturally in the water. But I also water all of our living room plants and all of our other plants with hose water and tap water, and they're totally happy.
Okay. I also want to visit your nursery. Where are you located?
My nursery is currently operated out of our home in Springfield, and I would love to set an appointment with you if you want to come by and see my plants.
I'll add something to that. We had an orchid program a couple of months ago, and one of the things we learned was if you have water softener, don't use your tap water if you have a water softener, because it's not good. Your plants don't like it. So tap, like, from the faucet outside, or rainwater, or treat
Yeah.
it so that it doesn't have all that salt in it.
Yeah.
It's,
It's definitely different.
yeah. I have another question here. What is the easiest rare plant to grow?
That is a toughie. I'd say for me, the easiest genus is philodendron. My personal favorite and what was the easiest for me were pink princesses, which is also why I'm falling in love with them. They're really hardy, resilient plants, and they're throwing out new leaves all the time, constantly growing. So I feel like those are the easiest, and I've moved them to many different locations in a greenhouse with humidity and ambient regular room humidity, and have had success with all of them. So they're very easy to acclimate and grow.
Wonderful. Any other questions in the audience? All right. I think people are really dying. Oh, we have one, two over there. Great. People are dying to get by these plants, I think.
I have a Rapidor.
Can you hold it up closer to your mouth, please?
I have a Rapidor, which a lot of people call it the mini monstera.
Mhm.
I am struggling with it.
Okay. Just some general tips and tricks. Well, I'd have to look at your specific plant. Go ahead. Mm. Uh-huh. Okay. Don't fear. I think if it's growing and it's robust and it's looking happy, putting it in soil is going to make it even happier. So I'd say go for it and keep it in the same spot that it's currently in, since it seems to like that. Yes, please.
So we purchased a milkweed plant for pollinators, and the first generation, caterpillars came out, they ate the leaves and turned into butterflies, and everything worked fine. Then another generation of caterpillars came, but the leaves hadn't grown back quite as much, and it disappeared. I don't know what happened to it, but I suspect it wasn't enough to eat there at that time. Is there any way of stimulating the growth of the leaves on the milkweed plant?
I'm not familiar with that plant in specific. I mainly stick to my aeroids and tropical plants, but to stimulate growth, you want to make sure, I think fertilization is definitely up there. If you want to just make sure that it has the right amount of nutrients in its soil to stimulate the plant growth, and that it's uptaking the right amount of nutrients from the roots as well. So incorporating some kind of fertilization in your routine. Yeah.
All right. I think we are going to end this program. Before we do, I want to ask you all, I'm going to share my screen. Mason, if you wouldn't mind, could you click out of that chat button for me? Thank you. Before I ask this, could you all please give Mason another big round of applause? We're so grateful for your knowledge, and just excited for you to share all this great work that you've done over the last several years. There are plants for sale. They're also delicious cookies. Do you want to talk about the cookies for a minute?
Yes, I have plant-based baked goods. I'm also starting a vegan bakery business here in Jacksonville. So I have some brown butter chocolate chip cookies. They're all plant-based. They're delicious, and you have definitely got to check them out. They're available right next to the plants. And I also didn't get to say thank you to Denise and to Susan for both having me here at the Garden Club. It's been a total honor and privilege to grace the stage.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So with that, I would like to ask you all, we take surveys, we do surveys for all of our programs. And so if you wouldn't mind, please pull up your phones and scan this QR code. I would love to capture as many of your, because I know you're going to have great rave reviews for Mason, and I want to capture those as much as possible. We're going to send you the link tomorrow as well, but we'd really love to get it now. If you're at home, please scan this with your phone, or Corinne can put the link in the chat as well, I believe. So please take the survey. It really helps us to get a feel for what you like. We know this was a great program. It's going to be, try not to kill each other, trying to get up here to the plants and the cookies. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. And we look forward to our next encounter. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.